Christmas is getting closer, and that means Santa's elves are very busy, which is perfect because we're making the elf block today for the Holidaze Sampler. These blocks finish at 6 inches by 9 inches. They're part of my Little Bit Different collection. Hi, I'm Andy from True Blue Quilts, and I'm so glad that you've joined me in this quilting journey. We just need 3 colors for our elf block. I've got my green for the main portion of the suit, and then I've got my yellow pieces and my little white squares that are going to go in the middle. So the top portion is traditionally pieced. Then the bottom section is paper pieced. And so I'm just using some scraps of the green and yellow to make the kind of fringe looking border on the bottom of the elf block. So let me get set up for paper piecing, and I'll give you a quick lesson on this portion of the block. Okay, all set up for paper piecing here. I like to have a small cutting mat next to my machine when I am paper piecing. And I have labeled the sections on my paper foundation with some notes about which fabrics go where. For this 2-color row, it's not going to be that confusing, but it's a good habit to get into. And I paper piece with scraps, and that way I can just eyeball how big a piece I need to cover the section that I am sewing. So, and then obviously we're going to need our rotary cutter. The add a quarter ruler is my number one essential item when I am paper piecing. It has a lip on it that gives you that 1/4 inch seam. That's why it's called add a quarter. And they come in various lengths. I like this little 6-inch ruler because I tend to be doing small blocks. So I'm not going to have any seam that's longer than that ruler can handle. So to get started paper piecing, we are going to put the fabric on the wrong side of the paper, and I am just using my regular printer paper for paper piecing, and I am going to set my stitch length very small. I use a 1.6 stitch length when I am paper piecing. Smaller stitches let you rip out the paper much easier. So I'm going to lay that fabric on the back side of the paper. I'm using a batik, so it doesn't matter right or wrong, but for this first step, the wrong side of the fabric goes on the wrong side of the paper. So you want your fabric right side up when you're looking at it here on the back. And then I'm going to flip that over, and I can see through the paper, and I can see that my fabric goes all the way around the section that I'm trying to sew. And then I'm going to take a pin, and I'm going to pin that fabric in place well away from my stitching line. And then I'm going to grab a postcard or an index card, business card, something that I can lay along that line, and I'm going to fold that paper back on that line, put my add a quarter ruler in place, and trim. And I am just trimming 1 layer of fabric right now to give me that 1/4 inch seam on the section that I was section number 1. This is, color by numbers because our paper piecing stuff is labeled. And then I'm going to take my second piece of fabric, right sides together with that line I just cut, and that will line up my first section of fabric. And I'm a little bit off there, so I'm getting that nice and lined up. And then I'm going to flip it over, take it to my machine, and I can see through there that my fabrics aren't staying lined up very well this morning. We'll just hold those together really nicely. You could pin both layers together, but I'm just, moving that very short distance. I can keep things in place. And I am just going to sew right on the line from start to finish, that one line between section 1 and 2. And so it takes me a minute to get things exactly lined up, and then I'm going to sew. You don't need to back stitch. You can go a few stitches beyond the line and you'll be fine. Now, if you were doing a lot of blocks, you'd be able to chain piece, but for this small bit of one section, I'm just going to keep trimming my threads. And you can see here, I've sewn right on the line. I don't have very much fabric hanging over, but now I'm going to finger press that yellow fabric in place. And I can see over here, I've got well beyond my seam allowance there on the top and the bottom of my paper. So I am good to go. And then we are going to repeat. We fold the paper, trim the fabric, add the next piece, and then sew. Fold, trim, add a piece, sew are my 4 steps for paper piecing. And I am just simply alternating my yellow and green fabric to make the trim on the elf suit. You can see how I hold that piece in place and double check that I've got my area covered. Some people will then go and trim off all their threads. I don't really bother with that at this point. That seam is looking a little bit wide. Let's, oh, where? I am right. I don't have much seam allowance on this side of the block, but I think it's going to be okay. The potential would be that we'd get a gap in our fabric there. I just need to be a little more careful lining that fabric up. Like I said, that green got to be a pretty wide seam, and I don't want any shadow of that green behind the yellow fabric. So I am carefully trimming with my scissors to get a better seam there. Okay, so now I finger press that down, and now we are ready to fold our paper again. And I always keep the pile of my paper piecing scraps. Sometimes you can use these in other sections of your paper piecing, depending on the size of the unit. So I never throw my scraps away until I'm all done with my project. Yes, that's gonna give me enough. Trying to conserve fabric here. So yes, I have my 1/4 inch seam. And again, if it makes you more comfortable to pin, go ahead. I just like to tightly grip my fabric and place it under the needle. Finger press that last bit, and then I can trim even with my foundation. It gave me a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around the block, so I will trim that. Okay, there we go. I can hold it up to the light and see that I've got all my seam allowance covered there. And there is our little trim for our elf block. So let me get the top half of the block pieced together. I showed you these pieces earlier, so let's lay them out again. I've got my little center row of his outfit. So I need to do this row first. So I will sew these white and yellow pieces together on the short side. I can go back to my normal stitch length, 1/4 inch seams. Okay, I can finger press those seams. And then we are ready to attach the top and the bottom half of our elf block. And the fun part about this is there are no seams to match. And actually, I'm going to flip this over so that the paper is on the top, because it doesn't like to go through the, for some reason, the paper doesn't slide under your needle as easily as fabric does. So just sew that last bit. Okay, and the question we always get is when to take the paper off. And I could do that right now. So I'm gonna, just this top edge that I have started. And just rip that off. And then I can, once you've got the two sides there, pops out if you need to get some tweezers to get these final little bits of paper out. We do that. Okay, and now I'm going to stay stitch around the edge of this block just because I don't want any of that to come apart when I am waiting to put this all together. And so I'm doing an 1/8 of an inch seam, and I'm just going right along the inner portion of as I said, I just wanted that stay stitching on this paper pieced section. I think this other seam will be fine until I sew the block into the sampler. So there is our merry little elf. So tell me in the comments if you're a fan of paper piecing and if you like these 6 by 9 inch little bit different blocks. I have another paper pieced Christmas block for you, or holiday, or any season of the year. We know how people are fan of gnomes, so check out this little paper piece gnome project next.